So the question we're going to ask next is the current stimulus for India's economy enough? Will it be enough to revive our economy? One question that the pandemic economic crisis has raised is whether globally has fiscal stimulus of the economy been more effective than monetary stimulus. One of the things that Ruchir Sharma, author and now contributing editor to the Financial Times, has spoken about and has presented very clear data on is India's fiscal stimulus, which has been low, but our monetary stimulus has been high. Our fiscal stimulus has been 2.2% of GDP during the pandemic year, which is less than half of the 4.47 fiscal stimulus that other developing countries have done. But India's monetary and credit stimulus has been much higher, at around 13% of our GDP, compared with developing countries which had only a monetary and credit stimulus of 3.5%. So in the final analysis, India's economy fell by 7.7%, or nearly 8%, while the rest of the developing nations' GDP fell by only 2.4%. So Raghuram Rajan, India focused largely on monetary and a smaller fiscal stimulus during the pandemic, but our growth rate fell sharply. Does that indicate that India needed to have greater fiscal stimulus and that our monetary and liquidity stimulus did not work that well? It really failed to boost the economy as much as we hoped. So fiscal versus monetary.
Right. I mean, look, we have to play with the cards we are dealt, right? We came into this crisis with a very large fiscal deficit. And so the ability to spend incrementally much more from that was limited. Of course, many of us have been saying there's more room than you think, and you can create more room by having a credible plan for fiscal consolidation once the pandemic is over. But if you don't spend enough right now, you risk permanent damage to households, to the small and medium sector, etc. I mean, to the government's credit, there has been some credit to the small and medium sector from the banks because of the government guarantees. That may actually turn out to be, on the fiscal books eventually if those guarantees are called on, if the small and medium banks cannot pay. It would be important to ensure that the banks that have made those loans also bear some of the costs. It's not a complete pass through to the government, but it's that's a problem down the line.
Exactly, as you say, that's a problem to be decided and rectified in the future. In the meanwhile, many sort of poorer sections and low-income households currently are suffering badly and need help now. What can be done for those people?
I think the issue that needs to be, looked at this point is how are our households doing? Are they, are the poorer households now that, as I understand it, the free grain is off the table now? Are they surviving? How are they surviving? What more needs to be done to keep them keep their body and soul together? That's I think a central question, because it is still going to be a few months till the economy comes fully back, and then the question is, those jobs which went away, are they going to come back in the same measure? The CMIE, as you know, and others have said something in the regions of between 14 and 18 million jobs have disappeared. So what about those people? How are they keeping body and soul together? In the rural areas, they have NREGA, which, presumably will be called upon if there is a need. There is no similar sort of system in urban areas, and that is a worry as we go forward. Certainly, that worry becomes less as we recover, but how are those households managing?
Yeah, it's really, really important that you point out this issue, and that the strength of your words will, I hope, make our authorities focus on this immediate issue and immediate crisis that the poorest and the most vulnerable are facing as we speak. But of course, in addition, there are longer term implications for these families who are actually now in what can be only considered a critical condition.
The other I think, central question we should be asking is, what about education? We've had kids out of school for now a year. Many of these kids have, no access to laptops, etc., have no ability to keep up online, even if their schools were teaching online, which many aren't. So when you spend time out of school, obviously your learning deteriorates. You forget what you learned. And now when they go back, what is the plan? How do we bring them up to speed? Many weren't doing that well in school in the first place. And now that they've fallen so far behind, will have no interest in school whatsoever. Are we going to see a massive dropout rate if, in fact, we don't spend on carefully and effectively bringing them back? And so this is where it would be important to see the state governments, which is a primary sort of source for education, ramp up. And the center has to support them. Unfortunately, that's one place in the budget where I think we need to probably do more.
So Michael Kremer, after the pandemic, what kind of government stimulus tends to be most effective, the best in boosting an economy?
If you look at what countries are spending to deal with the consequences of the vaccine, of the disease, it dwarfs what they're spending on vaccines. So even from a narrow fiscal point of view, this makes sense. And if you think about this from a broader point of view, whether you think about human health, whether you think about the livelihoods destroyed, whether you think about the education that's being interrupted, or the families that can't see each other, this is just something that should be a top priority. And so it's, this is a case, economists often say, be very careful how you spend the money. This is a case where we're saying, spend the money, it's worth it. We may need it to deal with the existing epidemic. We may need it because we're going to have new strains where we need protection. We may need it for booster shots. But, even could have enormous benefits. And it's very unlikely to be a bad investment.
So Abhijit, coming again to the need for a demand stimulus, is that the key to reviving our economy and for achieving this projected V-shaped bounce back for India?
I think demand is the issue. And demand has been very low, partly because incomes have been low, partly because people are also panicked. And they're holding on to whatever savings they have because they're not sure how long this will last. So they are unemployed and they don't know when they'll get their jobs, and therefore they're not spending. If you have 5,000 rupees in the bank and you don't know if it's going to be 3 months before you can find a job or not, then you don't spend. So people are, I think that where the spending is slow, especially is among the lower to middle income, low middle incomes categories. You see people are beginning to buy cars again, but not so many bicycles. That's very much the pattern that we see, and it seems to me that there is real worry that the mass market goods are not going to have enough demand.
One factor that is of concern about the impact of the budget, while the focus on spending more on construction and infrastructure is widely agreed to be a really good positive step, but there's a lag effect with construction and infrastructure, and the impact on boosting the economy may take a little while. So the real benefits will only be felt in the medium term and of course in the long term, not so much in the short term. And really vulnerable and poor families need help right now, the short-term help they need.
I think construction, as you said absolutely correctly, this kind of construction, especially which is ambitious, long-term, we're going to create hubs for textiles or automotive or other things. Those are they're not things you do in a day. Those hubs need to be, you have to make a good plan, you have to acquire land, you have to think about the interlinkages, the roads that go out in and out of those things, the airports. It's even just thinking about exactly how you're going to do it will take some time. In the meanwhile, money won't be spent. And if money is not spent, then that doesn't do anything. So my fear with this kind of supply side approach is more that it's really not designed for a demand crisis. They could have. So I see the model. I see that if this was construction, if the government said I'll start construction tomorrow, I think that would have real consequences. That would also be maybe a waste, in the sense that you don't want to necessarily just throw money at things. So it might have been better to actually give people some earnings, some urban Narega or something, just some form of earnings quickly, temporarily maybe, to revive the economy, and then get investment going and do the long-term plans at the same time. That's not the way the government has gone.
One of the issues that has come up is that, okay, India is going to go in for construction and supply side stimulus, and that's great. But as you mentioned earlier, the size and the scale of what India does on anything like on construction is just not large enough compared to the scale and projects in many other countries.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are always very, we say we do supply side, but when China does supply side, it's 10 times relative to GDP per capita, is 10 times as big. It's just, they have always been more willing to just take a big gamble. So we take very small, in the end, we take very small gambles. And those small gambles, we're always, very careful to check off all the boxes. But that means that the supply side boost is not that great. It's not going to be so much. It's going to be, it's a more a sign that this is what the government wants us to do, and it's going to, maybe it's a useful signal to send to markets, and the markets liked it. But I don't think it is the case that this is going to be a massive reframing of the Indian infrastructure scene. It's always going to be a kind of wrinkle on what happens in the private sector. So we really always relying on the private sector. When the private sector moves, we move. When it doesn't, we move very slowly. And I think we really need to focus on the private sector investing. So I think whatever the government does, I think the money for the SME sector, etc., for more credit to them is not a bad idea.
Paul Milgrom, may I just come back to you once again on the vaccines for poorer countries? You were just talking about it. I sort of want you to complete your thoughts on that. Just looking ahead, will we actually learn from this current unfair distribution of vaccines, going first to the rich countries and only later to the poorer nations? Will we learn from this?
The truth is that there's a limit to the capacities we have. There are going to be people who it'll take a long time to get everybody vaccinated, and there's always going to be people who go first, and it's always going to be, I think, in any kind of society, that people who are connected or advantaged or somehow, somebody's going to go first and somebody's going to be last. But the way it's distributed internationally right now is just very painful. You see people dying, and you see pandemics raging and destroying the economies of countries, this is not acceptable. This can't be a pattern for the future.
So really, it's really hurting the poorer countries. So maybe we learn some lessons from what we've done wrong, as well as where we've succeeded in handling this viral shock to the global system. We hope that we learn some lessons from it.
I hope so too. I don't think we're going to fix it in this pandemic, but again, I don't think this is the last pandemic, unfortunately.